Okay, thanks for joining me for what I'm going to call the week 1 update. Going forward, I'm going to try to name the videos based on how many weeks have passed. So week 1 update being 1 week after we've set up the Biocube. If you watched last week, shout out to Jimmy, my first subscriber. You'll see that we've got a couple of new additions. We made a little visit to the fish store yesterday. But we'll get to those guys in a minute. Wanted to share kind of what happened in the last week. As I mentioned last week, I used live sand and live rock as well as turbo start to cycle the tank. Tank cycled in about 5 or 6 days, so Thursday or Friday of last week. This is Sunday. Thursday or Friday, this tank had fully cycled. We were seeing about 5.0 on the nitrates, had a small spike in the ammonia on like Tuesday or Wednesday, small little trace of nitrites, and then the nitrates started coming up. So I took a water sample to my local fish store yesterday, and everything was in line, so decided to buy some fish and then some invertebrates. But before I go any further, I wanted to share kind of a mistake that I made. I did a lot of research on what type of fish I wanted to get and what's going to be ultimately compatible in the tank that I'm running, and had read a little bit about the acclimation process, but not nearly as much as I should have. So I knew that you had to float the fish in the bag at the top of the tank before you introduce them in the water, and I knew not to share the fish store's water into my own tank, so none of those type of issues. But what I did was I floated the fish for about 30 minutes so that the water matched, and then we opened the bag up, and my wife and I netted them directly out of the fish store water into our main water without any sort of acclimation. Now, clownfish, I understand, are pretty hardy fish, so I think they may be okay. We'll see next week. But in doing some further research, you're supposed to slowly introduce your own tank water into the water that you got from the fish store so that they slowly get used to it. I'll drop a link below to the acclimation process that really helps them. The other thing I read on multiple different sites and forums was you should do everything with the lights out so that it doesn't stress them out, which is completely counter to what I did. I put them into the tank and immediately flipped the lights on so that you could see what they look like. And I'll tell you, for about the first 24 hours or so, they hung out over here in this corner of the tank right here, which probably had something to do with them nesting over there in the corner. But they looked a lot like they were kind of getting blown over to that corner. So I had some questions about whether maybe my filtration was too high, the flow was too high. But as you can see now, they're kind of swimming around just fine in the tank. So what did I ultimately get? I purchased 3 clownfish. The Ocellaris clownfish, just your regular, Nemo orange clownfish. As y'all know from last week, I intend for this to mainly be a reef tank, so I'm not going to have a ton of fish in here. And trying to decide whether to start with corals or start with fish. I read people going both ways, and the consensus seemed to be that there wasn't a consensus of whether you should do corals first or fish first, and my local fish store confirmed that as well. The one consensus, though, that was amongst everybody is that you shouldn't try to do both at the same time. And so I've got 2 little boys, and they obviously wanted fish before corals, and so that's why we're starting with fish. The other thing, the reason why I'm kind of starting with the fish is to have them increase the bioload in the tank, and this tank can continue to cycle with the increased bioload, ammonia levels, etc., before I introduce more expensive corals into the tank, into the water. Put differently, the clownfish are a lot cheaper than the corals. So what else did I get? I got 3 snails, turbo snails. You can see one of them right here. If I zoom in, kind of on the rock there. You got one there. Have one up over here on the side of the tank. And then the other one is kind of back there at the back. You can kind of see him up there on the ledge. All right, next to that guy is another one of the one of my invertebrates we got. We got a cleaner shrimp, part of the cleanup crew. He's kind of hiding back underneath the rocks back there, but he's kind of cool when he comes out, jumps out and starts walking around. And then I got 5 hermit crabs, who are kind of the hardest guys to try to see in the tank. Got one over here in the corner. You can see one kind of right there on the rock. Another one up here on the rock. And then another guy kind of over here on the rock. In all, I got 5 of the hermit crabs. You see the shrimps kind of coming out a little bit more now. I did want to go ahead and get my cleanup crew in there from the beginning. Help clean up the tank. He tends to hide back there in the dark when people are looking at him. Let's see if when I take the camera off of him, a little camera shy, he'll come back out. Overall though, 24 hours after we've kind of introduced them to the tank, they seem to be acclimating now a lot better. However, as I mentioned earlier, follow those steps in the instructions I'll drop to maybe make it a little bit smoother process when you introduce your fish to the tank. As I promised last week, I'm going to try to keep these videos short, so we'll see how these guys do this week, and we'll do another update next week. Thanks.